Hey everyone, Ryan here at eTrailer. Today on our 2024 Kia Telluride, we're going to be showing you how to install the Redarc Tow Pro Elite trailer brake controller. And we're going to be doing that in conjunction with the etrailer.com Universal Brake Controller Install Kit. But before we get to that, why don't we take a couple minutes, check this out, and make sure it's going to work for you. It seems like these Kias are pretty popular, especially being used to tow some relatively large trailers around. And if your trailer has brakes on it, whether they be electric or even electric over hydraulic, you're going to need a way to apply those brakes. That way you're not just relying on your Kia's brakes to slow not only itself down but the trailer as well. And that's exactly where a brake controller like our Redarc is going to come into play. What happens whenever you hit the brakes in your Kia, it's going to send power back to the trailer and apply those brakes as well. There are a ton of different brake controllers out there on the market, and when it comes to the Telluride, I think the Redarc, like this one here, as well as the Redarc Liberty, are probably your best bet. I say that because I think they look awesome, almost like a factory type option. So the only thing you're going to be able to see is the small knob here, and that's how you're going to do all your controls and everything else. As opposed to the more traditional style brake controllers, that's what I call them at least. Something like this, for example, you know, you just don't have this taking up a bunch of space on your dashboard. You know, you'd have it mounted something like that or even over on the other side. And so visually speaking, you really can't go wrong, especially now, you know, these Kias look awesome inside here. And if it were me, I wouldn't want a big bulky brake controller kind of not only getting in my way, but taken away from the looks. This brake controller is going to work with trailers that have up to 3 axles, so more than enough for the Kia for sure. So you'll be covered there. And it's a proportional style brake controller as well, meaning however hard you apply the brakes in your Kia, the trailer is going to match that pressure. And so it just makes for a smoother braking experience, generally speaking. Kind of give an example at, let's say, if you're just rolling up to a stop sign and you just kind of gradually halfway on the brake, the controller is going to match that essentially. On the other hand, if you're going down the highway and maybe there's an accident or something and you really got to stand on that brake pedal, the trailer is going to respond the same way. It just makes for a better towing experience. That's not to say though you can't make adjustments, because you absolutely can. You can actually change the braking force. Maybe you have a trailer that's empty and you're going to pick up supplies or whatever. You probably don't need a whole lot of help to slow it down. So you could probably start, you know, on a 2, 3, 4, something along those lines. But then you get loaded down, you got a real heavy trailer, and you need to kind of ramp things up a little bit, get a little more braking force, have it get a little more aggressive to slow you down better. You can always dial the knob up until you kind of find that sweet spot for the particular load that you're carrying. And it also has what's called a manual override button. So if you just push down on this button, what that's going to do is send power just to the trailer brakes. All right. And so you would generally use this in the event of a sway. Say if you're going down the road and the trailer kind of starts to get away from you a little bit, you can always push this button down and even ideally feather it. I know in some cases that's hard, but when you push that down, it'll slow just the trailer down and get it riding true and straight behind you again. You can also put this brake controller in what's called the user control mode. Okay, and to do that, you would turn the knob all the way counterclockwise, put your foot on the brake pedal, and push the button down twice really quick. And you'll see that light turn from blue to green, and that lets us know we're in user control mode. And for the majority of people out there, you'll probably never use this mode, but it is good to have, right? I'd rather have it and not need it than the other way around. So what happens when you do that is it's going to apply the trailer brakes at a set rate. It doesn't really matter how hard you're actually pushing down on the Kia's brakes. So for example, you know, you set the adjustment by the knob. And let's say if you got it all the way turned up to a 10, for example, it don't matter if you're lightly on the brake pedal in the Kia, the trailer's brakes are going to ramp all the way up to maximum pressure over an allotted time, essentially. So it takes away that proportional feature, which that can be beneficial in some scenarios. Maybe let's say if you're going camping or kind of off the grid, so to speak, and you have really slick or rough terrain, and you just want the trailer to do the same thing every time, or be able to fine tune it, whatever the case may be. That's how you would accomplish that. At the end of the day, a really nice brake controller that you really can't go wrong with. You know, we get a lot of them in here. Seems like people like them, and I can see why. You know, they look great, and they do just about anything you ask them to. As far as the installation goes, not gonna lie, definitely time consuming, pretty involved, but something you only have to do one time, and then it's there for you to use from then on out. There are a couple of extras I do suggest picking up. So to start with, you are going to need existing 4-way flat trailer wiring to kind of build off of. On our vehicle today, we use the Kurt Universal Kit to get that part done. I definitely recommend picking up a no drill long bracket. That way you can actually mount your 7-way connector up to the back. And just a handful of ins and outs. You know, I used, not a bad idea to have a couple extra yellow electrical butt connectors and ring terminals on hand, as well as a grommet or a small bushing that you can use to run your wires from the engine bay inside of the vehicle to help keep them protected. So definitely a few things that I recommend, but you know, hopefully if you take your time and stay focused, hopefully we can make things a little bit easier on you when it comes to getting this all set up. To begin our installation, we're going to be here at the back of our Kia, and the first thing that you want to do is set up a bracket. That way we can mount up our 7-way plug. And the kit is going to come with this bracket, but not one to connect it to our hitch. And so what I did, I took a no drill long bracket, clamped it to our hitch, kind of put a bend in it, and then bolted the included one to it to give us a good mounting point. We'll grab our 7-way harness and start to kind of prep it. So this 4-way flat connector here, it has this dust cap on it. We'll just cut that off, get it out of our way. And you're gonna have several wires coming off of it. One of them will be yellow in color, and we're not using that. That's for a reverse light signal, which isn't required for this type of setup. So I just kind of doubled it over and taped it up out of the way. And there's going to be pre-attached butt connectors just like this on the wiring ends, and you can use them. You know, they'll work just fine. Just tape them up real good once you have connections made. But I opted just to upgrade to these heat shrink style ones because it ends seal and just help against corrosion a little bit better. So we'll change this one out too. And this is how we're going to make all of our connections, whether it be a butt connector or ring terminal, anything along those lines. You'll strip the end of the insulation back a little bit. Then you can twist the wire nice and tight. And you can take the connector, put that over the bare end of the wire. And crimp it down. The harness prepped, we'll slide the wiring through our bracket. This one kind of slides into place like this. And then we'll take the hardware and bolt it down. So you take a screw, push it through. Get this out of our way so we can see actually. And then you'll put on a flat washer. Take the little split lock washer, put that on, and then the nut. And I usually get these all started hand tight, and we'll come back and snug them down. The kit's gonna come with this big bundle of duplex wire, and you can cut back this gray sheathing to expose the 2 wires underneath of it. And you can usually just cut a small slice in it and peel it back, or take a utility knife and very carefully cut in the middle. But you'll have a white wire and a black wire. Strip them ends back. And the black wire coming from our 7-way connector plug is going to get connected to the black duplex wire. And then the blue wire coming from our 7-way connector, that's going to get connected to the white wire. And if you happen to upgrade to these heat shrink style connectors, once you have the connection made, you can come back with a heat source and seal up the ends. I taped up our connections there for a little extra protection. And what we can do, the 4-way flat here, I'm going to apply some dielectric grease to the terminals to help prevent corrosion. And we're going to plug this into our existing 4-way flat trailer wiring. And to make a semi-permanent connection, I'm just going to wrap some tape around this and then zip tie them together. Here's how that turned out. That way they just don't come apart over time. And you'll have a white wire that had the pre-attached ring terminal on it. That's meant to be grounded. And I suppose you could find a spot back in here to do that, but everything's pretty tight. And so instead of fighting that, I just took maybe a couple foot long piece of wire here, used a butt connector to extend this. That way we can route it over to an open area and get it grounded. For our ground wire, I just ran it over to the driver's side, and you might have an underbody panel here. Yours will probably be removed already if you're doing this. You're probably doing wiring and everything else, but if not, there's a couple of 14mm plastic screws you can undo, and then a couple of push pins. But I'm going to ground this to our frame. I crimped on a ring terminal, drilled a small pilot hole, a little bit smaller than the self-tapping screw that they give you, and we'll just get this secured. We can get our duplex wiring ran to the front of our vehicle. And when you're doing this, avoid any hotter moving parts and use your zip ties every now and again to keep it secure. But I just ran it along through here and on top of our subframe up through there. Here's where our wire comes over the subframe, just kind of runs along through here. And at this point, I just followed some factory lines. It's usually a safe bet. You might have a panel like this, kind of covering this up. It makes it a lot easier if you lower it. There's just a couple of 10mm head screws you can pull out if you want to. If you do decide to route it this way, but I just have it following along through here. In case you're wondering too, this red and black wire, that's unrelated to this kit. It's for something else, but it just continues along our brake lines where it goes up into the engine compartment. And on these are pretty wide open. You can usually just push the wiring kind of up into place. If you're having a hard time doing that, you can always use a pull wire, meaning get a piece of tubing or straighten out a metal clothes hanger, drop it down from the top, tape your wiring to it, and then you go back up and pull it into place that way. The engine compartment, here's where our wiring comes on up. And right here in this area, what I've done is cut that sheathing back, right, to expose the bare wires. The white one is eventually going to run inside of the vehicle on the driver's side floorboard. We'll get to that in a minute. But the black one, you can run over this way to where we have them mounted up to our circuit breakers. All right, and with these, pretty straightforward. I just use some self-tapping screws to secure them to this part here. You're going to have a 40 amp breaker, which is this one here, and a 30 amp breaker, which is this one here. Whatever brake controller, you know, everyone's a little different. Ours requires a 30 amp. If you're using a different one, check the instructions. Some might require a 20, which the brake controller install kit does come with, so just check that out. But that black wire, what it's going to do is run over to our 40 amp breaker. Okay, and you want to cut it to length, crimp on a small ring terminal, and put it on the silver post on that 40 amp breaker. You can now make two wires that'll run from the post on our circuit breakers to the positive battery terminal. And I got both of them here. They're probably, 16 inches or so in length. But I crimped on small ring terminals. You're going to put those over the brass or copper colored ends on the circuit breaker. So one on the 40 amp, one on the 30 amp. These are eventually going to get hooked up to the positive battery terminal. So I crimped on ring terminals on that end. We're going to wait to the very end once everything's hooked up and everything to put power to this. That way we're not trying to deal with wires that have power when we're hooking everything else up. So we'll just let them set here for now. With the rest of the black wire that's remaining, you should have probably 4 or 5 foot of it left. Crimp on, small ring terminal, connect it to the silver post on the 30 amp breaker, and this is going to run back around. And that black wire along with the white wire, like I said, that's going to go into the cab of our vehicle on the driver's side floorboard. Now I did have to create a hole to push these wires through. A little tricky to see from out here, but pretty wide open underneath. So we'll go inside and check that out. Under the driver's side dashboard on the firewall, here is where the wires pass through. And like I said, I did have to drill a small hole. Thankfully got quite a bit of room. And I pushed a grommet into place. That way our wires weren't rubbing on bare metal. And so use something, whether it be a grommet or some type of snap-in bushing to help keep those protected. With our wires in the cab, I crimped on a couple of butt connectors, and we can hook these up to our Redarc harness here. And so you'll have a black wire from the Redarc. That's going to get connected to the black wire here. So this is battery power. And then the blue wire from the Redarc plug, that's going to get connected to our white wire from our brake controller install kit, and that is going to be controlling our electric brake output. The white wire from your brake controller plug, that's going to be a ground, and so I just crimped on a ring terminal there. The red wire is going to get hooked up to the cold side of your stoplight switch, meaning whenever you push your brake pedal down, there will be a wire that sends power out, and that's where we want this one to be hooked up. With this vehicle, that wiring is tucked way up under the dash, and so it's hard to show you how I'm making that connection. So I want to give you an example. So the wire under the dash will be green with a black stripe on it. And what I do is actually take maybe a foot or 2 piece of wire, whatever you got laying around, and connect it to it and make a jumper, right? So that way, say if this is a factory wire, our jumper will tie into it, and then this piece can come down a little bit further, and we can connect it like this with a butt connector. It just makes it so much easier to see and get to. But the way that you can make that connection is with a quick splice, all right? And so one of them, you can kind of unsnap it open. You want to unsnap that open and put that around the factory wire, all right? And then you can take your jumper, or I mean, if you feel like hooking this red wire directly up into it, you can do that too. It kind of depends, you know, on your comfort level there. But either way, you take the other wire and push it through until it stops. And you want to try to make sure that these are sitting in there nice and straight. And then you can take a pair of, I like to use needle nose pliers, and push down on that piece of metal there, and then close up the cover, and that's going to splice in and complete that connection. Here's that wire that I spliced into, and kind of tucked up there, kind of behind the steering column, there will be a bundle of factory wiring, and in our case we had some blue tape over it. You know, you can pull that tape back, and that's where you're going to be able to get to that green wire with the black stripe, which is the brake output. As far as that ground wire that we connected that ring terminal to, on the driver's side kick panel, so as far left as you can go under the dash, there's this big metal bracket here, and you can remove that factory bolt using a 12mm socket, put the bolt through the ring terminal, and snug it back down, and that'll provide us with a sufficient ground. What we're able to do now is get this Redarc mounted up and everything, and I built a little bracket for it. The cool thing with these, you can pretty much mount them however you want, whatever direction, so on and so forth. They just have to be just something solid, you know. I built this bracket to essentially just make it easier to see. There's other ways. You could screw this to the firewall or something along them lines. But doing it this way, it gives us a better idea and a clearer picture on everything. So nothing really to it there. There's going to be 2 connections on each side of it. And I like to kind of have everything prepped, more or less. So the wiring that they give you, one end matches up here. And then that connector plug down here will plug into this side. And I'm actually going to mount this up in an area somewhat close to where we put our ground. So I'll utilize one of those factory bolts. And I'll get that done now and show you how it turned out. Here's how our Redarc turned out as far as getting it mounted up. So I just used the factory bolt there, ran it through a hole in our bracket, bolted it down, and then at that point kind of just tucked up some of our loose wiring, you know, zip tied it up out of the way. That wire that we plugged into our Redarc, the other end of it, which is this here, I just ran to this opening here on our dash. So this is just our fuse block cover, all right, and it's wide open. You just push it right up through here, and this panel is where we're going to mount our knob. And I'm a fan of this because it's easy to get to. You got enough cable here to where if you do need to get into the fuse box, you know, it just comes out with it, and you're not really interfering with anything. And I thought too, if you ever, you know, want to get rid of the vehicle or whatever, it's probably not too bad to just replace this little panel, because we will have to drill a hole in it, as opposed to doing it on your actual dashboard or something along those lines. Figure out where we want to put the knob on our panel, and so, you know, looking behind here, it looks like this corner is going to have the most room. So I put a piece of painter's tape there and a little mark where I think we want the center to be. And they give you this little sticker. I'm just going to use it as a template essentially, but eventually when we actually put everything together, the nipple there, you're going to want that to be straight up and down in that 12 o'clock position. So just kind of getting an idea here on where we're going to need to drill that opening out. Drill the small pilot hole in the center there, and you can use a 25/64 drill bit to create the opening. If you have a metric set, that's a 10mm, or a 3/8 bit gets you really close. It's a little on the small side, but that's probably the size bit that a lot of people are going to have. We'll go ahead and drill this out here. I took that sticker, put it over the hole there, making sure that nipple is up in that 12 o'clock position. You can take your switch, line that up, and they give you this plastic nut here. You can get that started, and when you're doing this, be really careful. These things are super easy to cross thread. So if it feels like it's not wanting to go on straight, you know, don't force it. Take it back off and kind of redo it. It should go on with relative ease by hand. And once you're confident that, you know, it's on there right, you take a socket. This is 12 millimeter, and I'm just going to barely bump it just to snug it up a little bit. And then this knob, if you rotate it all the way counterclockwise, as far as it'll go, then you can take this knob, and you want the 0 to be in line with the with that nipple there, and that just snaps right on into place. Plug this wire in to the back of our switch. Kind of just carefully make sure nothing's going to get jammed up here, and we'll snap this back into position. Come into the engine compartment and hook up our power now. So we have our positive battery post. We can remove that nut with a 10 millimeter socket. We'll take our terminals there, put them over the post, and tighten the nut back down. Now that we're all set up though, you know, we got our brake controller installed and everything else, it's a good idea to test everything to make sure that it's working properly. So I just hooked up to a test box here that simulates a trailer. Probably not gonna have one of these at home. You can always use your actual trailer, but keep in mind if that has any issues, it might mislead you into thinking it's something you did on the vehicle side. We'll go ahead and try our signals. So we have our left turn, our right turn. We'll turn on our taillights, can hit our brakes, and not only do we have our brake lights working, but we have brake output getting sent back there too from our brake controller install, so we know that is working as well. And then in that top right corner, we can see we have our 12-volt auxiliary power, so that's good to go as well. Since we verified the brake controller is working like it should, we can calibrate it now. So the button, when you're plugged into a trailer, it'll be flashing green and blue. And we're looking to turn it to a solid color here. And so to calibrate it, you don't have to be hooked up to a trailer or anything. You can just drive it like you normally would. And after, you know, a handful of braking applications coming to a complete stop, it will calibrate itself and we'll get a solid color. When you are calibrating this, it is a little bit easier, I guess you could say, if you are hooked up to your trailer, because you can actually see that color change kind of as it's happening. I will say this though, if you do it that way, make sure you're in a safe spot. You know, that way if any issues do occur, you definitely want your trailer brakes to apply and give you plenty of room to stop and slow things down. So just be smart and be safe whenever you're doing this part. After calibration, we have the light that turned a solid blue, so we know we are in good shape. And with that all done, that'll finish up our look at and our installation of the Redarc Tow Pro Elite trailer brake controller on our 2024 Kia Telluride.